Opening the center immediately, this pawn push stakes a claim for space and prepares swift development. Opens the diagonal for the queen, immediately challenging the center and setting the stage for a classic confrontation. Developing the knight to f3 immediately contests control of the central d4 square, a pivotal battleground for early initiative. Developing a piece to contest central control and defend the pawn is a principled response. Establishing a strategic pin on the knight immediately pressures black's central pawn and influences the development of black's pieces, creating immediate tactical opportunities. Challenging the bishop's outpost immediately, though it might surrender central influence later. Preserving the bishop's influence on the long diagonal maintains pressure on black's queenside structure. Solidifying the center and preparing for, in f6, black subtly contests space and avoids the immediate clash on f6 that might arise from g6. Solidifying the center and preparing a timely d4 push to expand space, while also safeguarding the bishop. Developing the bishop here solidifies the pawn structure and prepares to castle, though it does block the c-pawn's advance. Central pawn thrust opens lines and challenges black's knight, creating immediate strategic tension. Developing the knight here relinquishes crucial control of the e5 square and invites a potential pawn storm on the king side. Developing the knight to a more active square, aiming for central influence and potential kingside attacks, clears the way for other pieces. Preparing to develop the bishop to a more active diagonal, aiming to control the kingside while potentially challenging white's central pawn structure. Opening the d-file dramatically shifts the pawn structure, creating immediate central tension and opportunities for both sides to exploit the newly formed imbalances. Unlocking the e-file for your rook is a worthwhile trade for the momentarily weakened central pawn structure. Unleashing a pawn storm on the kingside, white boldly seeks to exploit black's slightly cramped kingside structure. Challenging the pawn chain, this maneuver awkwardly hinders the knight's development and creates a permanent weakness on the kingside. Relocating the bishop clears the diagonal, aiming to pressure black's weak dark squares and potentially prepare a queenside advance. Anchoring the king's defense, this pawn advance creates a strategic stronghold while potentially limiting the bishop's scope. Centralizing the knight opens up attacking possibilities and aims to disrupt black's pawn structure. Developing the bishop to this square cramps white's kingside pawn structure and aims to exchange off the knight, controlling the d4 square. Unleashing the queen hints at immediate pressure on the kingside, disrupting black's carefully built structure. Focusing the queen towards the kingside, qd7 prepares to support the g-pawn's advance and potentially challenge white's central control. Consolidating piece activity, white subtly prepares to contest the open d-file while bolstering the kingside's defensive structure. Strategically redeploying the knight to c8 aims to support a future pawn advance on b5 and bolster the queenside. Concentrating knights on the queenside, this aims to challenge black's uncoordinated development and exploit the exposed kingside pawns. Stepping onto b6, the knight boldly asserts presence, eyeing the vulnerable c4 square and preparing for a potential kingside storm. Exchanging knights clears the f-file and forces black to reevaluate their defensive setup, potentially exposing the king. Opening the h-file for your rook is a bold positional gamble, creating immediate attacking potential at the cost of pawn structure weakness. Shifting the knight to a more central square might improve its influence. Sacrificing the rook opens the h-file with aggressive intent, targeting the weakened kingside. Unleashing the king offers dynamic counterplay along the open files, aiming to exploit black's exposed king. Accepting the material imbalance by capturing the knight creates immediate, dangerous attacking prospects for black on the kingside. Unleashing the kingside pawn storm now looks premature, potentially leaving your monarch exposed to the advancing dark-squared bishop. Shifting the rook to the flank offers better support for the pawn push and prepares to contest the h-file, a potentially decisive theater. Sacrificing the knight frees the g-file for an attack and initiates a dangerous kingside assault. Sacrificing material to blast, open the H-file for immediate king assault, a daring counterblow against white's exposed monarch. Reclaiming the rook on the open file immediately ignites tactical possibilities and challenges black's pawn structure. Securing the king behind a pawn shield, this castling maneuver initiates a critical endgame phase, aiming to liberate black's rook from its passive position. Unleashing the queen offers aggressive counterplay, eyeing black's still exposed monarch after the recent exchanges. The rook bravely ventures into the heart of white's territory, aiming to disrupt the coordination of the enemy queenside. Opening the H-file for the rook, this move immediately targets black's exposed monarch, forcing a decisive response. Black seeks to untangle the queenside and solidify the king position by repositioning the queen. Repositioning the bishop here aims to bolster kingside defense and prepare for potential counterplay on the queenside. A valiant attempt to redeploy the knight, aiming to disrupt white's attack and perhaps shore up the queenside. Solidifying the queenside structure while preparing potential pawn advances is a patient but sensible choice. This knight's repositioning gambles with pawn weaknesses for a dynamic outpost, aiming to disrupt white's central control. Solidifying control over the queenside squares now, preparing to develop a more robust pawn structure. Black opens a daring pawn lever, aiming to unravel white's slightly cramped queenside, creating dynamic imbalances. Unleashing the rook to the 8th rank, this aggressive deployment aims to exploit black's somewhat passive knight placement and potentially unravel the queenside. Seeking shelter for the vulnerable king, this move consolidates the black monarch's position while preparing for potential counterplay. Unleashing the bishop on the long diagonal, white aims to exploit black's exposed king and control crucial light squares. Retreating the rook to d6 defends the pawn and prepares for potential king's side counterplay, but sacrifices valuable central space. A daring foray onto the 7th rank, white sacrifices positional solidity for a potent attack, hoping to exploit black's exposed monarch. A necessary repositioning, aiming to unlock the blocked queenside and challenge white's centralized bishop. Shifting the bishop back, white seems to relinquish the pressure on the queenside for a moment, but prepares for a potential queenside pawn push. A bold attempt to destabilize the kingside and create counterplay by expanding on the queenside. Sacrificing the bishop opens the g-file, creating a direct assault route towards black's exposed king. Reclaiming the f8 square, black activates a knight into the fray, hoping to disrupt white's centralized pieces. Snatching the pawn immediately capitalizes on the undefended e5 square, disrupting black's fragile central pawns. Reclaiming the queen solidifies your position, but watch for the open king and potential pawn structure weaknesses. A devastating discovered check rips open black's king safety, forcing a swift and painful conclusion. The king's sanctuary is now a precarious target, demanding immediate repositioning to avoid further pressure. Unleashing a powerful fork, the white rook forces a king retreat and gains material, fundamentally altering the board's balance. The king dodges a mating net, seeking refuge on a more secure square. Refocusing the queen's pressure towards the vulnerable black king's sanctuary becomes the priority. Unlocking the c-file for your rook and potentially freeing your knight is the goal here, creating dynamic counterplay. Recapturing on d5 immediately addresses the open d-file and aims to simplify the position. Unleashing a pawn storm at last, black desperately seeks to ignite counterplay against white's imposing kingside presence. Unleashing a decisive check, white forces a favorable exchange and simplifies into a winning endgame.